And now, your feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled movie review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Matt, you're looking a little de-aged today.
I'm looking young, that's why I got the beanie on and the hoodie up, gotta look young just like Catherine Keener.
You have that
in the Adam
uncanny
Project.
valley look.
Today we are reviewing Shawn Levy's The Adam Project, starring Ryan Reynolds, Mark Ruffalo, Jennifer Garner, a 13 going on 30 reunion, right?
Yeah,
Is
well,
that where
even
the-
with Catherine Keener,
Yeah.
Catherine Keener and Mark Ruffalo were in Where the Wild Things Are.
There we go. Walker Scobell, Catherine Keener, and Zoe Saldaña. It is now streaming on Netflix everywhere. Eric, how are you this Saturday afternoon?
Well, I'm good for the fact other than that we're reviewing The Adam Project, which is such a derivative mashup of movies that you could be enjoying, whether it be E.T. or Back to the Future
Sure.
or any Amblin film directed by Spielberg or Joe Dante or Robert Zemeckis. And watching this, like it's perfectly inoffensive, but that's almost why it's so vulgar to me in a way, that it just doesn't do anything other than the thing that it thinks it's doing that's smart is that it's quoting these movies that it's referencing, even Star Wars, like the whole speeder bike
Yeah.
chase in Return of the Jedi and on Endor. It's just like, okay, we get what you're referencing. Like, it's so surface level.
Well, and they talk
its
about
sentiment.
lightsabers multiple times.
Yeah,
so
but it thinks it's clever by referencing those
by
things.
being
So it's almost like,
self-aware.
by beating you to the punch to criticize them. It's like, we already know we're doing it. You can tell.
Let
I
it
love
out,
this
buddy.
movie.
Let it out.
It
Go
bothered
ahead.
me. It bothered me because, again, before we started recording, we were talking about Shawn Levy's filmography, and he is like the perfect kind of like middle of the road curator, company man, filmmaker, and there are varying degrees of
The
these
Ron
guys.
Howard of popcorn movies.
But even Ron Howard has had
I
some
know.
hits, and like
Yes.
I think again,
One
like,
in every 10 you might get a Ron Howard banger.
Yeah, but even J.J. Abrams, who, like, in my Rogers review, I compared this right off the bat to Super 8, and that's as truly as derivative as a Spielbergian kind of an action-adventure movie as you can get, but at least that had some heart and passion in it. And, you look at Matt Reeves, who's just done the Batman, and J.J. Abrams and Spielberg, and even, Ron Howard. These guys are, I mean, Spielberg, I think, generally does have great talent, but the other guys, they're company men, and they're only as good as the sum of their parts. And if they're smart enough and have enough taste, they can kind of assemble something that resembles nostalgia and something that you grew up with and you loved, but at the same time it does its own thing, or it becomes its own thing as the story progresses, or you really begin to care about the flawed protagonist and the characters as they go on their adventure. With Levy's films as a director, I've never gotten that sense. And even with Free Guy, which was, you mentioned it, I think this is a perfect term to coin in terms of giving a filmmaker a soft pass.
His whole filmography to me is that. It's like
I mean,
3 out of 5.
his peak was with 3 episodes of Animorphs, because he's a Canadian director and started like as an actor as well. Like he was in that horrible Adam West movie called Zombie Nightmare, and then also was in The Kiss and things like that, and became a filmmaker. But he's also a good producer. Like, I can't deny, like, some of the films that he's produced, whether it be Denis Villeneuve's Arrival or even The Spectacular Now, like, he does at least know on that capacity. And obviously with Stranger Things, I feel
which
like
is
the
derivative in a good way, right?
Yeah, and then Stranger Things, like, yeah, I still have problems with Stranger Things as well.
You do.
But at least with Stranger Things, there's enough there to justify its entertainment value. And you kind of get the sense that when Shawn Levy probably came across the script, which has been written by 4 people, and you can kind of tell that it is, again, this mishmash of ideas kind of all kind of coming together to create this time travel paradox where Ryan Reynolds plays a hotshot pilot in 2050 who steals this wormhole jumping ship to go back to 2022 and goes to basically correct or rectify a problem with the past that will affect the future, and runs into his 12-year-old self, kind of almost in a like ET-esque kind of way that Elliot discovers ET the first time, and then from there it's them kind of
I forgot
dodging.
that ET is just a future Elliot, you know.
He kind of is in a way, like I mean, like he's that old, right? Like, he's so
Yeah,
wrinkly.
yeah.
But that's kind of what it is. Like when Walker Scobell's
Oh, to the shed
version,
and finds him. Yeah, it's exactly that.
yeah, like you're just waiting for. I was thinking like, oh, is Walker Scobell or Walker Scobell going to pull out like a bag of Reese's Pieces and like lead Ryan Reynolds back to the house? It's that it is that formulaic in its structuring and predictability. But yeah, and then the plot kind of gets into the idea that like, okay, do we go back further? Like, what do we do in terms of rectifying things, and how will they change the course of history?
Yeah.
And there's this father son sort of subplot involving Mark Ruffalo, who's basically the inventor of time travel, and how that kind of relationship is a little bit more prickly than like a classic kind of Ron Howard movie or Spielberg film. I mean, Spielberg is actually one of those guys who obviously gets criticized for being very sentimental, but he does take a very harsh stance when it comes to the dynamic of separation between family members. Like, you look at E.T., the father's completely absent in that film. You look at Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Richard Dreyfuss's character is somewhat neglectful of his family, and Spielberg for the longest time was always very critical and harsh of his father Arnold for leaving them, and he didn't have the full story and know what exactly went on. And so you see that in some of Spielberg's earlier work, and with this, like, it just kind of feels again just very paint by numbers, that they're following something that's been done better but also had a reasoning. This is just a copy and paste, and it made me like Free Guy more, which is I guess an accomplishment. So anyways, Matt, I'm gonna let you go, because like I'll ramble on about a couple other things once we get
we'll get
into it.
into it. I mean, and I don't disagree with anything that you're saying. I think, like, again, when I soft pass to, you know, Shawn Levy is my thesis statement for
soft
him.
Pass, soft pass, Shawn.
That's a tongue twister. Soft pass, Shawn. Yeah, and which is, I think, totally fine. Like, I think he's a perfectly okay, middle of the road, you know, popcorn filmmaker that, you know, journeyman, whatever you want to say, or, you know, but I'm totally fine with this movie. I was totally fine with Free Guy. I was totally fine with Real Steel. I'm like, the thing I like the most is probably Stranger Things, that he, you know, directs a few episodes here or there and produces it. You know, I don't disagree with anything that you're saying. I think the movie is rough around the edges. It's janky. It's derivative. There's some questionable acting from everyone, from this kid who's just doing, you know, his best Ryan Reynolds impersonation, which, if you guys have heard recent reviews of any Ryan Reynolds movies from Eric and I've been on the I'm kind of sick of his shtick train for a while. I like Ryan Reynolds. He seems like a really nice guy. I think he's funny. I love the kind of stuff he's doing in outside of film, with whether it's, you know, his marketing agency, and he just seems like a smart,
for Sick
funny
Kids
guy.
as well.
Sick Kids, everything he does, I think he's a great guy. I just think he got so stuck into doing the same thing his entire career that I'm just now 20. How long has he been acting? 20, 30 years.
He's so old.
It's just, I don't know when Pizza Place was. That was 20 or 30 years ago, right? Like,
yeah, two guys, a girl, in a pizza place. Yeah, like that was like the mid to late 90s, and before that, like, he would pop up in like an episode of The X-Files and things like that. And so he's been around for a while.
And the sarcastic, funny, handsome dude thing he's been doing his entire career. So, and what I
and
actually
then when Deadpool became successful, it just kind of
ratcheted it up to 100, and then he started getting even more of that kind of role and everything. And for me, it works in Deadpool because he's almost perfect casting in Deadpool for that.
Because that's the character, though.
Yeah, but when you bring that into other things all the time, it just doesn't show a lot of range. And in this movie, to be fair, he seems a little toned down because they had to let the kid be the obnoxious Ryan Reynolds caricature, which is almost like, all right, Reynolds himself seems a little toned down because he has to be the adult in this situation, even though you see a little bit of that throughout the movie. But then you get this kid where, you know, it was grating to me that this kid is just doing his best adult Ryan Reynolds impersonation that you've seen in 50 other movies before. But when it comes to like the action and, you know, the plot, it is derivative. The action sequences are derivative. But I found myself like not hating any of it, which is like the softest pass you can give something. I thought some of the emotional
Soft pass, Shawn.
yeah, I thought the CG looked brutal at times. I wrote a note saying like, why do Netflix movies just always look bad? Like,
well, especially
it's
their
just
their sort of blockbuster
yeah,
gambles, right?
it's
Like,
almost just like they have enough money, but it's whether the it just never seems like enough. Like on when it comes to the CG, it always has like a sci-fi original movie feel to it at times, which is just like, man, they needed to put a little bit more into the CG in this movie, and we'll get into a specific thing very, very soon. But I did think that there were some genuinely sweet moments. I like the moment in the bar with Ryan Reynolds and Jennifer Garner. And like, I actually thought that was a genuinely sweet moment. And there are those scattered throughout the movies, whether it comes with relationships with, yeah, with your father, your mother, with a single mom and things like that. So, I mean, I went back and forth with going like, I'm having a perfectly okay time watching this to then going, oh, that looks not so great, or kind of rolling my eyes at a line, or like uh corny stuff like the I've got timeline, or is this time travel, or the future is coming sooner than you think.
is
And
that a
then all these different
lightsaber? That's a
like
lightsaber.
it's just it's a little much, and it kind of overstays its welcome. But you know, for the first half of it, I was like, oh, this is a perfectly enjoyable family film. And yeah, it might be, you know, derivative of 100 million other things that you might have seen, but a lot of kids might not have seen that stuff. And I always go back to, I understand where you're coming from, Eric, but like, I think stuff like this is fine. That is, you know, riffing off a lot of that stuff. And then my only hope from it is that they do get interested in that other stuff, or the parents that they're watching them with goes, oh, you know what this really reminds me of? Those movies that you're referencing, Eric. And then maybe they show their kids that, because this is a movie meant for kids, you know, 12 and under, right? And like, I do hope that, you know, with where we're at with streaming and these kids that are so used to this stuff, that this is where they go, you know, this is where they'll go to, because there's a new movie with the guy who they've seen in a bunch of things, and the guy from the Avengers and stuff like that. And then they go, oh, cool. And their parents watch it with them and they suggest something else. So like, I that stuff doesn't bother me too much, because I do hope it's a gateway to that other stuff. But you know what, it's just one of those movies that I'm like, okay, it's perfectly okay, and I think that's okay. But then, you know, when they get Sean Levy gets announced for Deadpool 3, which, you know, I like the Deadpool franchise enough, but that I'm like, all right, cool. So I saw a tweet that's like, Ryan Reynolds making Sean Levy his like go-to director just kind of completely makes sense, because
His
it's
Martin
just like,
Scorsese.
because it's just like, you know what you're getting every single time, and it's probably not going to be awful.
Well, also, it's probably
and
going to be PG-13, right? Like Sean Levy, like I've got his
Deadpool won't be, you think, but
but it
I
might,
don't know.
but I think Levy's more of a company man, where you know, like he will play ball with Disney, and obviously he's had a working relationship with them more recently with Free Guy.
Yeah.
So like I could see them making a PG-13 version of Deadpool, because if they're going to bring that character in some way into the MCU, they have to kind of.
They have said they're going to make it R though. So like,
Oh,
I
okay.
think that like,
Because Kevin Feige even was talking about not Deadpool recently, but even like with Blade, saying that he has no interest in making any of the Marvel properties R-rated, and that it would be
yeah.
PG-13 at the highest. And Blade
So
is a character that also feels like he should be an R-rated character within the MCU. Even the way that they're marketing Moon Knight right now.
well, they're testing it with Moon Knight. Like Moon Knight's the first like 14A or whatever, or like mature, maybe not mature in the US, but like it has a higher rating than just their classic like PG stuff. So they are kind of trying to push the boundaries with that stuff. But anyways, that's a separate conversation with the Deadpool thing, but we'll go over another time. But
Are you ready?
yeah, I don't know.
You ready to go through this wonderful filmography?
Yeah. So I don't know. Like, I thought some of the music was fun. I had a perfectly okay time, which is like not the best criticism, but like, I think some of it works, and it kind of goes through the motions, like you're saying, and the Catherine Keener de-aging is one of the worst things I've ever seen in my entire life.
It looks like they basically took the same um software that they used for Tron Legacy and just
Which was
decided
how
to
many
go with
years ago?
that. Yeah, it was what, 2011
Yeah,
or 2010. And so with that, it just like, again, we've seen recently that some de-aging works well enough, especially with Spider-Man No Way Home being so successful with at least Alfred Molina.
hmm
And it's like, okay, well, if you can do that, and Netflix has the money to make that work. It just kind of feels like, oh, were they rushed and they just kind of had to put something together? It would work better. That would be more forgivable in something like Free Guy, because at least you could say,
a
oh, well, it
digital
takes
world,
place in
yeah.
a virtual reality of some
Yeah.
sort. But like
Which they
when you're,
had some of that, right? With the Ryan Reynolds weird looking jacked dude looked awful, but it made
yeah.
sense for a video game. Like,
So yeah, you can kind of give it that soft pass on that aspect of the filmmaking. But here, the other thing as well, we know what Catherine Keener looks like when she was younger. I mean, she's done a ton of indie films from like the late '80s, early '90s, and also, I mean, you sent me a photo of her on guest spotting on Seinfeld, but like even being John Malkovich, which
mhm.
she got her first Oscar nomination for. Like, you have that frame of reference, and it's the same kind of distracting kind of quality that like even The Irishman had, which is, again, speaking of another Netflix production that had over $200 million to work with, and sort of the time to try to tinker with de-aging De Niro. But because you've seen De Niro in all those early Brian De Palma movies and Scorsese films, it's just like you know what he looks like, and when you see the Uncanny Valley version of him, it takes you out of the film. And I think where they place Catherine Keener's version later on in the movie is probably one of the biggest problems with the film, because I think if you had maybe a little bit more time, you'd kind of be more forgiving. But because it is almost at the beginning of the last act of the film, it's like, okay, you've just shown me this horrifying creature, this
Yeah.
non-person, and everybody's acting like she's flesh and blood, and it's just like, no, this doesn't work. And then that's all you'll remember from that last act, and obviously from the rest of this movie. I will say as well, I agree that the Jennifer Garner bar scene is the best, and is the one moment that kind of feels like it
A
came from
different
another
movie.
film
Yeah, yeah.
entirely, because it is much more subtle and earnest
It's
and
kind of
kind of,
when the movie clicked for me where I'm like, "Oh, that was genuinely good." And then
yeah.
some of the others, and then I went back and forth with going, "Ugh, this doesn't look great," or "Oh, that was genuinely a tender moment or a good moment," or something like that.
And I will also say that I think, like, even though I found Walker Scobell annoying, I don't think
Mhm.
it's his fault. I think he was
No.
directed to give an impersonation of a younger
Yeah,
Ryan Reynolds, which
totally.
is also just strange, because I disagree with what you're saying with, I think Reynolds, he's not obviously at 12 like the kid is, but the idea of somebody being the exact same in a mirror reflection, so it's like, oh, like we do the same things and we have the same
Yeah.
mannerisms. It's like, well, you grow up over time and you change, and it's like, so you're telling me the 12-year-old version of this character is basically the same person and remembers all the little details about
What they
growing up.
did, yeah.
Like, I can barely
Oh,
remember like
yeah.
what I ate
Last
yesterday
week.
for dinner, let alone like the fridge being closing a certain way. Like, it's just like it kind of takes those liberties, and it's like, okay, so he's basically been a man child for like 30 plus years of his
It's a
life, and he's never
metaphor for
really,
Ryan Reynolds' career.
yeah, he's never grown up in any capacity whatsoever. So it's just, yeah, it's strange that it's like, okay, we're gonna really focus on the actors choreography in these scenes, and sort of show you like, oh, like they eat the same way, or they touch their face the same way. It's like, you don't need to do that. Like, you can have certain little moments peppered throughout, but like they really emphasize, it's like, this is the same person, even back then he was like this. And then there's even stuff at the beginning of this movie where he gets suspended from school after a bully punches him in the face, and is literally, his nose is gushing blood. And like, there's no conversation about like, okay, well, he started it, but he didn't physically abuse the other guy. And like they're even forcing like, you know, nicknames or one lines like mullet mouth in the same way that like E.T. did with penis breath. And it's just like it's trying so hard to be that movie, and it just doesn't work because it doesn't have the heart or the structure to really be its own thing. It's just basically kind of going through the motions of what it thinks one of these movies is. It's basically the CGI, the DH Catherine Keener, where it literally kind of is an algorithm of what one of those
Trying to
movies
be
is.
something, but then
Yeah.
doesn't quite nail the look or
Yeah.
feel of it.
There's just something so off about it that it's just like, yeah,
I don't disagree. I don't
like even the
disagree.
performances. I normally do like Mark Ruffalo. I don't think he's that good in this movie. I think he's kind of
No, no, no.
awkwardly cast in the role of kind of being the absent-minded father
Yeah.
genius, you know, professor. And even like the one moment like when he's in class teaching everybody and they're kind of showing that he has like, you know, an affability to him, even when like he, you know, points to the one girl and says, "Oh, I get the face off, you know, shirt thing," and stuff like that. It's just like it doesn't really work.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree. You know, I don't think it's a great movie, but I thought it was perfectly serviceable for, you know, a family crowd that's just scrolling through Netflix. So,
I'm gonna go
um
quickly. I'm just gonna go through Shawn Levy's filmography
sure.
here. So, Big Fat Liar was kind of like his big breakthrough film with Frankie Muniz and Amanda Bynes and Paul Giamatti. Then he directed Just Married with Brittany Murphy and Ashton Kutcher. He
Mhm.
did the remake of Cheaper by the Dozen and Cheaper by the Dozen
Mhm.
2, both with Steve Martin. He did the Pink Panther remake, also with Steve Martin. So Steve Martin was his Ryan Reynolds before Ryan Reynolds. He directed some TV
All 3
shows
Night at the
and
Museum
yep.
movies.
He directed a music video for Beyonce, A Woman Like Me. He directed Date Night, Real Steel, The Internship, This Is Where I Leave You. Whew. Um, Free Guys, we mentioned The Adam Project, and now he's just been announced to direct Deadpool. So, you know.
It's a weird amalgamation of movies, and that's why I keep comparing it to Ron Howard, because I agree with you that Ron Howard every once in a while will deliver something that's truly pretty good. Where
Well, even
nothing
Ridley
here,
Scott, right? Like Ridley
yeah,
Scott's also in that category. He
yes,
doesn't
where
write
you
his
look
own
at their
stuff.
yeah, and you look at their filmography, and it's all over the place when it comes
Yeah.
to genre or what the movies are about and things like that. You can kind of see that he has a family vibe to him with the Night at the Museum movies and his earlier stuff. You know, and even Real Steel to an extent, and you know, whatever. But yeah, I agree with you that it's you know, I think every one of those movies you said, I haven't seen a lot of his earlier stuff in a very long time. Probably
You got to
since
go
they
back and
came
watch
out.
those episodes of Animorphs.
I haven't seen Animorphs in so long. I
I
used to
haven't
love
either.
Animorphs though.
Same.
Like I had every book, like fucking a dude turning into a dolphin, amazing. But yeah, he's a, and I don't mean this as an insult because it's just like he's just perfectly fine, and
Yeah.
like everything he does to me is like a okay, that was like a 3 out of 5. If you, I take it or leave it. Like you watch streaming is perfect for him. Like I
Like
feel
Adam
like
Sandler.
yeah, like Free Guy and this, I'm like, and even the Night at the Museum movies, I'm like, all of that stuff is like perfect Disney Plus, Netflix kind of throw it on for your kids or watch it on a Friday night with the family or something like that. And I think that's totally fine. I can't see him doing anything more than that. And I'll
Unless like
see.
he kind of like stumbles into the perfect storm where it's like
Yeah.
everything is like around him just as good as like he can be on his best day. And like if he could find a movie where everything is firing on all cylinders like the way that the Jennifer Garner Ryan Reynolds bar scene is, then maybe he
Mhm.
could pull
That's
that
true.
off.
Yeah.
But again,
And
because
I don't,
like you can't not say that like someone can figure it out. But like you look at the Ron Howards, the Ridley Scotts, like those guys like are only as good as their scripts and the people around them. And
yeah.
Ridley Scott does have more of a distinct style than Ron Howard or Shawn Levy with kind of like the kind of cool look of his films. But like you look at how kind of off both like House of Gucci is compared to The Last Duel or The Martian. Like obviously Ridley Scott has you know a wheelhouse with you know biopics, medieval kind of films and sci-fi movies, but like everything in between that there's a lot of
of
filler.
random stuff. Yeah. Yeah, so we'll see about Deadpool. I mean, I'm curious because it is going to be in the MCU. It says in January 2021, Kevin Feige reiterated that the sequel will be rated R and set in the MCU. And I think the head of Disney also said that. Whether they put it under the 20th Century Studios banner, or maybe just Marvel Studios. I guess that's Marvel Studios is its own studios. So it'll be really interesting. And then I was excited to see someone else kind of tackle the material because they had Wendy Molyneux and Lizzie Molyneux Logan doing the script, who wrote for Bob's Burgers. And now they have Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick coming back to do a rewrite on the draft, which was the writers from the first two movies. So I don't know. I guess it makes sense to bring them back. They're familiar with it. They kind of did those first two movies. Everyone's comfortable working with one another, but I was kind of excited to see someone else's take on it. But I'm curious to see how that fits into the MCU. I mean, I would not be surprised if we see Deadpool pop up either in Multiverse of Madness or something beforehand to set that up, just because when all these universes, or maybe he's one of the only few that actually comes over, right, and remembers everything that happened before. I'll be interested. And I think, Levy seems like a perfectly in Deadpool 3, I wasn't looking for a Taika Waititi or a James Gunn. Well, I mean, that would be great, either of those guys, but like,
Well, especially if you're on your third movie, like, why not go
yeah,
wild? But I guess
yeah.
because they're bringing this character in for the first time and he is an
And the
R-rated
first two did
property,
so
so
well that you probably just kind of want, gives everyone what they want and do it a little bit differently, same but differently. And like, it'll be interesting what other MCU characters, if they do go R-rated, are they going to let some of that stuff like they did with the X-Men characters, like go far? It'll be interesting to see. And I don't know. Shawn Levy seems like a perfectly fine choice for it, and they'll give Marvel Studios and Disney kind of what they want with that movie. So
he'll be Phase Four's version, or Phase Five if the Deadpool movie doesn't come out till then, of Peyton Reed.
that's exactly who I thought, dude. I thought the exact same thing. So we'll see. I'm gonna give the Atom Project a soft pass, which is a 3 out of 5 for me. I thought it was perfectly fine.
Sorry, soft pass, Shawn. I gotta give this a 2 out of 5.
Thank you all for listening or watching. We really do appreciate it. We have a bunch of other reviews we would love for you guys to check out right now. Another streaming movie, you guys can check out a review for Turning Red, which is now streaming on Disney Plus. That's probably our most recent thing. But we also have a spoiler cast and a spoiler-free review up for The Batman. So the spoiler-free review would be on this feed right here, or if you're on YouTube, it'll be here as well. And then if you want to watch the spoiler cast, it's on the other channel, Untitled Movie Podcast, which we have kind of our main show. The last 2 weeks we've been doing spoiler cast for the after party for the Batman, but we'll be back this week with an analysis on the Critics' Choice Awards, which are this Sunday. If you're listening to this before then, go check that out, 7 p.m. Eastern on the CW and TBS. Eric and I have both voted, and we'll be kind of breaking down all those awards this week on the show. One-stop shop for everything. Just head over to Letterboxd, which is Untitled_movies. Probably your easiest place to find everything we do. As always, my name is Matt Rohrbeck. You can find more of my work around the internet, mostly at UntitledMoviePodcast.com and on Family Feud Canada. And you can follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Eric Marchand. You can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
ET phone home and Ryan Reynolds call your agent.